It's Christmas morning, 1996. Patsy Ramsey is already up by 5:30 a.m. In the kitchen, she prepares herself a coffee. The family has plans to fly out on vacation later that day, and Patsy wants to use the early hours to finish packing. Her husband John and their children, JonBenet and Burke, are still asleep, or so she believes. As she heads down the stairs to the ground level, something unusual catches her eye. On the lower steps she finds a note. Patsy begins reading the lines, and suddenly a chill runs down her spine. Her daughter is not peacefully asleep upstairs. She has vanished. What follows is one of the most perplexing cases of the late 20th century, filled with confusion, contradictions, and an overwhelming number of theories. We begin this episode by stepping into the first moments of a story that would grip the entire nation. JonBenet Ramsey was born in 1943. In 1980, he married Patricia, 13 years his junior, known to most as Patsy. 2 years before, his first marriage had ended. From that relationship he had 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. They lived elsewhere, and unfortunately, John had limited contact with them. Tragically, his daughter Elizabeth passed away in a car accident at just 22. On January 27, 1987, John and Patsy welcomed their son Burke. Just over 3 years later, on August 6, 1990, their daughter was born. They named her JonBenet Patricia Ramsey, a blend of her father's first and middle names and her mother's first name. In 1991, the family moved to Boulder, Colorado. John's company, Access Graphics, had its headquarters there. His career brought financial success, and soon they were living in a 15-room home, more a mansion than a house. At a young age, JonBenet began participating in beauty pageants. Patsy, who had also competed in pageants in her youth, shared her knowledge. With her guidance, JonBenet quickly began winning local titles and soon earned recognition at larger events. Her charm, poise and talent attracted widespread attention and perhaps some envy. Despite the public spotlight, life in the Ramsey home appeared comfortable and full. That is, until everything changed on December 26, 1996. Christmas was always a grand celebration in the Ramsey household. Their home was beautifully decorated for the holidays. On December 24th, a neighbour even dressed as Santa Claus to surprise the children. At the time, Burke was 9 and attending elementary school, while 6-year-old JonBenet was in kindergarten. That Christmas Eve, the family spent a joyous evening with friends and loved ones. The Ramseys enjoy a pleasant evening with close friends and relatives. Spirits are high as they look forward to continuing their Christmas celebrations. On December 25th, the family visits their friends, the Whites, and spends a relaxed day with good company and a shared meal. On the way home, JonBenet falls asleep in the car. Once they arrive, John gently carries her upstairs and puts her to bed. Patsy wakes early, around 5:30 a.m., to make coffee and prepare for their upcoming vacation. As she walks down the stairs toward the main level, something catches her eye. A handwritten note lies on the steps. As Patsy begins reading, her heart starts to race. It begins, "Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully. We are a group representing a foreign faction. We respect neither you nor the country that you serve. At this moment we have your daughter in our care. She is safe and unharmed. If you want her to see 1997, you must follow our instructions exactly." The note continues with demands. You will withdraw $118,000 from your bank account, $100,000 in $100 bills, and the remaining $18,000 in $20 US. Make sure to bring an adequate-sized briefcase. Upon returning home, place the money in a brown paper bag. We will contact you tomorrow between 8 and 10 a.m. to provide further instructions regarding the transfer. It cautions, the transaction will be physically demanding. Be well rested. If we detect you have obtained the money early, we may contact you sooner to arrange an expedited handoff. Any deviation from these instructions will result in immediate consequences. You will not receive your daughter's remains for a proper farewell. The letter goes on. The two individuals with your daughter are not fond of you. Do not agitate them. Speaking to anyone, including law enforcement or federal agencies, will place your daughter in immediate danger. If you involve the police, the result will be irreversible. If you notify bank officials, it will have the same outcome. If the money is marked or tampered with, she will not return. It warns further, we are monitoring for electronic devices. If we detect any, the consequences will be severe. You may try to deceive us, but you've been warned. We are familiar with law enforcement methods. You have a 99% chance of her safe return if you comply. If you don't, the odds disappear. Your family is under surveillance, as are the authorities. You are not the only wealthy family in the area. Do not think this task is beyond our abilities. Do not underestimate us. Use your good judgment. Victory. Signed simply SBTC. Despite the clear warning not to contact anyone, Patsy immediately calls the police at 5:52 a.m. to report JonBenet missing. She states she had just woken up and found the note, and that her daughter was no longer in her bed. During the call, Patsy is emotional and panicked, urgently asking for help. Afterwards, she reaches out to friends and family, asking them to come over for support. Soon, the Ramsey home begins to fill with people, friends, neighbours and relatives, all unaware that the note explicitly stated no one else should be involved. Patsy's actions, while emotionally understandable, directly violate the instructions, potentially placing her daughter at greater risk and complicating the investigation. But this is just one of many puzzling aspects of the case. Very little about what happens next aligns with what anyone might expect. Chapter 3. The Investigation. Within minutes of the call, 2 police officers arrive at the Ramsey residence. Their initial assessment reveals no signs of forced entry. Officer Rick French begins checking possible access points, including paths into the basement. He approaches a door secured with a wooden latch, but instead of opening it, he turns back. He assumes the door isn't significant and doesn't consider it could be an entry or exit point. John Ramsey expresses a willingness to pay the ransom. He and Detective Linda Arndt wait for further contact from the alleged captors, but the expected phone call never comes. Meanwhile, forensic technicians arrive to examine the home. JonBenet's bedroom is sealed off to preserve potential evidence. However, no meaningful forensic traces are found there or elsewhere in the house. As friends and family move freely through the residence in an effort to comfort and support the Ramseys, they unintentionally compromise the scene. With so many people walking through the house, potential clues such as footprints, fingerprints or other trace evidence may have been disturbed or lost. This, too, becomes one of the major setbacks in the unfolding investigation. Around 1 p.m., Detective Linda Arndt asks John to take another look around the house to see if anything seems unusual. John is accompanied by Fleet White, a close family friend who had hosted them the day before. Together, they begin checking the basement. John unlocks the door secured with a wooden latch, the same one Officer French had seen earlier. Upon entering, John makes a heartbreaking discovery: the lifeless body of his daughter JonBenet. She is partially covered with a white blanket. Her hands appear bound, and there is a cord around her wrists and neck. Her mouth has been covered with tape. Nearby, investigators would later find what appeared to be part of a broken paintbrush attached to the cord, suggesting it had been used as a twisting mechanism. In a highly emotional moment, John lifts JonBenet and carries her upstairs. However, this action means that the crime scene is no longer preserved in its original condition, which complicates the investigation. Officers are now left to reconstruct the scene without seeing it as it was initially found, raising questions about potential contamination or loss of important details. The discovery is devastating. Everyone had hoped the situation would end with JonBenet's safe return. Now the note's promise of her being unharmed appears to have been false all along. Shortly afterward, a piece of cord, identical to what was found around JonBenet, was located near her bedroom. The brush used in the cord's mechanism appears to come from a paint kit within the home, though part of it remains missing and is never recovered. Investigators also examined Patsy's art supplies, as she had painting materials nearby. To rule out the family as potential suspects and distinguish their genetic material from that of unknown individuals, police collect handwriting samples, hair and DNA from the Ramseys. As the autopsy results are released, the official cause of death becomes clear. Before being strangled, JonBenet had suffered a severe head injury. A blunt force impact had caused a fracture at the base of her skull. The medical examiner determines that the final cause of death was strangulation, occurring between 45 minutes to 2 hours later. There is also an extremely small amount of unidentified male DNA found on her clothing. However, the trace is so minimal that it may not be connected to the perpetrator. Ultimately, the sequence of events leading to JonBenet's death remains unclear. In the days that follow, the investigation continues, but not without missteps. As previously mentioned, the only section of the home that was properly sealed for forensic review was JonBenet's bedroom. The decision to allow numerous friends and family members to enter the house resulted in a chaotic environment. With people freely moving between rooms, the scene was compromised. No record was kept of who entered which parts of the house. Adding to the puzzle, John was allowed to search the home unaccompanied, even though he had not yet been ruled out as a person of interest. The officer who asked him to search advised starting from the top of the house and working downward. However, John went straight to the basement instead. Fleet White later noted something else that seemed unusual. When they entered the basement, it was dark, but John reportedly began shouting that he had found her even before the light was turned on. Investigators also struggled with the lack of signs indicating a break-in. No broken windows or doors were discovered. Furthermore, although there had been snowfall outside, there were no clear footprints around the house, neither approaching nor leaving. Some have pointed to this as evidence suggesting the perpetrator was someone already inside the house. Others argue that parts of the yard were protected from snowfall and could have been used to enter or exit without leaving visible tracks. The basement remains a central point of focus for investigators trying to piece together how this tragic event could have occurred. Still, 2 unidentified footprints, believed to be from hiking boots, were found inside. To this day they remain unassigned to anyone. One of the windows had been broken months earlier and was never repaired. Additionally, 2 other basement windows had holiday light cables running through them, meaning they couldn't be properly sealed. As suspicion shifted, the focus gradually returned to the Ramsey family as possible suspects. One reason was the so-called ransom note. It had been written using a pen and paper from inside the Ramsey home. Investigators found 2 earlier drafts of the letter discarded in a trash bin, suggesting the author had spent considerable time writing and rewriting the note. Strangely, the final version spanned nearly 3 pages. Most experts agree that an actual kidnapper writing from inside the victim's home would likely keep such a note brief. John and Patsy Ramsey both submitted handwriting samples. Experts quickly ruled out John as the author of the note. Patsy's writing, however, bore some resemblance to the ransom letter, though not enough for a conclusive match. Interestingly, the beginning of the ransom note looks stylistically different from the rest. As the letter continues, the handwriting begins to more closely resemble Patsy's. Another unusual clue came from the Ramsey family photo album. Investigators noticed that some of the handwritten captions beneath the photos appeared to match the writing style in the ransom note. When asked, Patsy initially claimed she didn't know who had written those captions. Later it was revealed that she had written them herself, a detail she either forgot or avoided disclosing. Although no expert could definitively link Patsy to the ransom note, 6 different handwriting experts were consulted. 2 of them, who were hired by Patsy's legal team, concluded that she likely did not write the letter. However, even they stopped short of stating it with certainty. The others were inconclusive or leaned toward a possible match. Patsy's fingerprints were found on the note. On its own, this isn't necessarily suspicious. After all, she handled the letter when she discovered it. But taken together with the other inconsistencies, it raised further doubts about whether the letter was truly written by an unknown outsider. Dr. Michael Baden, a well-known forensic pathologist who studied the case, remarked that in all his years he had never encountered an extortion note quite like it. He publicly expressed doubt that it was written by an outside kidnapper. Another detail that drew attention was found at the family's kitchen table: a bowl of milk and pineapple. This was a snack JonBenet and her older brother Burke were known to enjoy. The bowl had fingerprints from both Patsy and Burke. However, JonBenet's autopsy revealed undigested pineapple in her stomach, indicating she ate it not long before her death. This conflicted with John and Patsy's statement that JonBenet had fallen asleep in the car and was carried to bed without waking. Adding to the mystery, JonBenet was still wearing the same clothes she had worn earlier that day while visiting the White family. Some believed that Patsy may have quickly dressed her in those clothes in a panic, or that perhaps JonBenet had never changed out of them in the first place. John, Patsy and Burke were each interviewed multiple times. Despite the many questions raised, investigators could never gather enough definitive evidence to accuse any of them of involvement. On December 31st, just days after the tragedy, JonBenet was laid to rest. She was buried next to her half-sister Elizabeth, who had passed away years earlier in a car accident. In the summer of 1997, 6 months after JonBenet's death, the Ramseys moved from Boulder to a new home in Atlanta. Despite a few scattered leads pointing in different directions, no one has ever been definitively proven guilty in the case of JonBenet Ramsey. That's why several theories have developed over the years about what could have really happened. All these theories generally fall into one of 2 main categories. Either JonBenet was killed by someone from outside the house, or the perpetrator was someone within her own family. Both options come with potential suspects and imagined timelines, and both have contradictions that make them difficult to prove. In the end, viewers must come to their own conclusions. Especially in the early days following JonBenet's death, the theory that someone from outside the home had entered and murdered her was widely accepted. At that time, there was little reason to doubt the family's story. The ransom note appeared to support this idea, and the public responded with sympathy for the grieving parents. The Ramseys received support from friends, neighbours and relatives, all of whom offered their condolences. The theory that someone connected to John Ramsey's work might be involved also gained traction. One reason was the specific ransom amount demanded, $118,000, the exact same amount as John's recent Christmas bonus. That detail led many to believe the perpetrator must have had inside knowledge of the Ramsey family's financials. Because of this unusual sum, some speculated about a possible religious motive. The number 118 was linked by some to Psalm 118, but after consulting multiple clergy members, no convincing connection was ever found between the Bible passage and JonBenet's death. That theory was eventually dismissed. Another theory, more persistent and darker in nature, was that JonBenet had become the victim of a child exploitation network. This idea was partly fueled by the fact that JonBenet had frequently participated in local child beauty pageants held in Boulder, where young girls wore makeup, fancy costumes, and performed choreographed routines. Critics of these pageants suggested that predators might attend such events looking for victims. Some conspiracy theories even accused the Ramseys of knowingly offering their daughter to such individuals. According to these suspicions, one of those men may have taken JonBenet to the basement and either accidentally or intentionally caused her death, prompting the family to stage a kidnapping to cover it up. This theory could explain the presence of unidentified DNA on her clothing and certain physical injuries, but police never officially investigated in that direction. For some, that remains a significant and troubling oversight. Over time, more specific suspects have emerged. One of the most notable is Gary Howard Oliver, a man who lived nearby and had a prior criminal record involving drug possession. In 2016, 20 years after JonBenet's death, he also faced allegations related to child abuse. Back in 1996, Gary had already drawn attention due to what many considered an unusually emotional reaction to JonBenet's death. Despite not knowing her personally, he built a small shrine in her memory and often spoke publicly about how deeply he was affected by the case. He claimed to feel a personal loss, describing her as an extraordinary child whose death was a tragedy for the world. An old friend of his even reported that Gary had called him shortly after JonBenet's death and allegedly confessed to harming a young girl. More disturbingly, Gary's mother once claimed that he had tried to strangle her using a homemade garrote, a tool very similar in design to the one later found at the scene of JonBenet's death. Given the media attention the case received, there were also many individuals who falsely claimed to be connected to the murder, just for the sake of attention. This made the investigation even more complicated, as police struggled to sort fact from fiction. The presence of false leads and unreliable claims made it harder for investigators to determine which statements could be trusted and which ones were pure fabrication. In the end, while Gary Howard Oliver remains one of the more well-known names mentioned in connection with the case, there was never enough hard evidence to formally charge him. It must be said that the ransom demand itself loses all meaning if JonBenet's body is left inside the Ramsey home. A kidnapper would either take the letter with them if the child had already died, or take the child and continue with the ransom demand. Doing neither seems illogical and unlike any known extortion case. Adding to that, the blow to JonBenet's head and the strangulation were determined to be at least 45 minutes apart, indicating that more than one action happened within the house. That would mean the perpetrator not only had the time to search for paper and pen to write a lengthy ransom note, but also took that risk while still inside the house, knowing full well that anyone from the family could wake up at any moment. Investigators later confirmed there were no clear signs of forced entry. A basement window was broken and 2 others were unlocked, but the cobwebs around them were undisturbed, which made it highly unlikely anyone entered that way. One argument that casts suspicion back on the family is how quickly John Ramsey found JonBenet's body. Despite having been instructed to search the house from top to bottom, he headed straight to the basement and discovered her behind a closed door. Additionally, the Ramseys had endangered their daughter's life, if she were truly missing, by calling over friends and neighbours to help them search the house, despite the ransom note explicitly warning them not to inform anyone. Another detail that raised eyebrows was the claim by John and Patsy that JonBenet had fallen asleep in the car after the family returned home that evening and had never woken up. That was proven false when pineapple was found in her digestive system during the autopsy. Pineapple she had eaten shortly before her death, a snack that Patsy often prepared and that JonBenet liked very much. But if the kidnapping was staged, then who could have killed JonBenet and why? Over the years, suspicion has fallen on every member of the family. John Ramsey, her father, has been accused by some of abusing his daughter and then killing her to cover it up, but there is no solid evidence to support such a claim. Patsy Ramsey has also been widely discussed. Some believe she may have been jealous of the attention JonBenet received from pageant success Patsy once sought for herself in her youth. The theory suggests that in a moment of rage, Patsy may have struck her daughter and, believing she had killed her, staged a kidnapping to protect herself and her family's reputation. But friends and relatives described Patsy as a caring mother. According to Burke, Patsy never resorted to physical punishment. He said, "We never got spankings, nothing that would suggest she was ever tired of us." Even Burke himself has not been spared from speculation. The idea that JonBenet's older brother may have killed her emerged early and gained traction over time. He was considered by some to be aggressive and jealous, and it was reported that just weeks before JonBenet's death, he had struck her with a golf club out of anger. In more recent years, a widely discussed theory has developed that outlines a possible chain of events on the night of her death. It's important to emphasize that this theory remains unproven and purely speculative. According to this version of events, JonBenet may have actually fallen asleep in the car that evening, but at some point she woke up. Burke was still awake and told his parents he was hungry. Patsy then prepared him a small bowl of pineapple, his favourite snack. Shortly afterward, JonBenet wandered into the kitchen and asked if she could have some. Burke didn't want to share, but JonBenet reached for a piece anyway. Angry, Burke allegedly grabbed a flashlight from a nearby drawer and hit his sister on the head. At that point, JonBenet was unconscious, but still alive. Patsy and John believed she was dead. Fearing that Burke could be taken away, or that their family would be publicly shamed, they decided to make it look like a kidnapping. Burke was sent to bed. Patsy wrote the ransom note, and they carried JonBenet's body to the basement. There, they created a scene to support the story they would later tell, fashioning a garrote from a string and part of one of Patsy's paintbrushes. When it became clear that JonBenet was still alive, they may have strangled her in a final act meant to make the scene look convincing or to end her suffering. There is one final detail in support of this theory that hasn't yet been mentioned: the 911 call made by Patsy. She seems to think that she has already hung up the phone when voices can still be heard at the end of the 911 call. Many listeners claim to hear Patsy saying, "Help me, help me, Jesus, help me," and shortly afterward John saying, "We're not talking to you." Finally, a child's voice is reportedly heard asking, "What did you find?" though the sound is unclear and has been debated for years. The discussion about what was really said in the final moments of the call remains highly controversial. If a child's voice was indeed captured, it would directly contradict the parents' later statements that Burke had been asleep throughout the call. The family's babysitter mentioned that Burke was always an early riser and never stayed in bed past 6:30 a.m., which casts more doubt on the timeline. Burke himself gave inconsistent answers in later interviews about whether it was his mother or father who woke him up. Burke's behaviour in the aftermath of his sister's death also drew attention. Observers found it odd that he appeared cheerful, even during JonBenet's funeral. He was seen smiling and laughing, which many people interpreted as inappropriate, especially considering the circumstances. Just 13 days after her death, in a conversation with his child psychologist, Burke said he was fine and that he would eventually forget about JonBenet's death. However, it should be noted that children his age often do not fully grasp the concept of death or its permanence. Grieving processes differ, and what may seem strange to adults can be normal for children. Still, another of Burke's comments was more difficult to dismiss. In one interview, he speculated that JonBenet may have died from a hammer blow, even though he was supposedly not told about the cause of death. In another moment, he drew a family picture with only himself and his parents in it. JonBenet was missing from the drawing, even though it was made on the very day of her death. Back in the Ramsey home, police discovered a bowl of pineapple on the kitchen table. Both Patsy's and Burke's fingerprints were on it. It was confirmed that Burke had eaten pineapple the night before, and he admitted it was his favourite fruit. He also said he and JonBenet sometimes shared it. When an investigator showed Burke a photo of the bowl, he avoided addressing it directly and commented only on a glass seen next to it. Even 2 decades later, suspicion lingered. In a televised interview with Dr. Phil, Burke discussed his sister's death while smiling throughout, behaviour that some viewers found unsettling. In 1998, police and prosecutors announced that Burke Ramsey was not a suspect, and no charges were ever filed against him. Then, on July 10, 2008, Boulder County District Attorney Mary Lacey formally apologised to the Ramsey family for the accusations they had faced over the years. She publicly declared that DNA evidence excluded the Ramseys from suspicion. However, this conclusion did not go unchallenged. Some independent DNA experts questioned the reliability of the findings. The traces were extremely minimal, and critics argued that such traces could have been transferred during the clothing's manufacture and therefore did not amount to exonerating evidence. Even Police Chief Mark Beckner stated that it was inappropriate to fully clear the family based on DNA that had not even been proven to be connected to the actual crime. In October 1999, it was revealed to the public that a grand jury had, back in 1999, voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey for child abuse, resulting in death, and for helping to cover up the crime by placing the child's body in the basement. The indictment also alleged that they allowed an unidentified person to be exposed to the danger that led to JonBenet's death. However, the district attorney at the time decided not to move forward with charges, citing insufficient evidence to secure a conviction. The case of JonBenet Ramsey remains unsolved to this day. On February 3, 2009, the investigation was reopened, and in 2015 it was officially closed again. In September 2016, CBS aired, which supported the theory that Burke killed his sister. In response, Burke filed a defamation lawsuit against CBS and the producers. In January 2019, his lawyer announced that the lawsuit had been settled under undisclosed terms. JonBenet's death remains one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries in America. Her case has inspired numerous books, documentaries, and ongoing speculation. Patsy Ramsey died of ovarian cancer in June 2006 at the age of 49 and was buried beside JonBenet. Burke has since withdrawn from the public eye. In the summer of 2022, an investigative team requested permission to re-examine the DNA evidence using the latest technology. A GoFundMe campaign was launched to support this effort, with John Ramsey backing the project as well. Whether these new tests will lead to any meaningful breakthroughs remains uncertain. I will continue to bring updates to you through. You can find the link in the info box. Be sure to check it out, as we regularly cover updates on ongoing and past criminal cases and release short documentaries as well. That brings us to the end of today's video. I'm looking forward to reading your comments and theories about who was responsible for JonBenet's death. Was it her own family, or was an outsider involved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.